that this is the occasion for her administration to climb down from the high pedestal and to say, we made some mistakes. We presided over an environment that led to the death, unnecessary death of Tanzanians. Let us heal. The only way to heal is to talk about the Tanzania that we want. And I've heard Tanzanians in different parts of the country saying we need to re-examine our constitution. This is the time. What has happened in Tanzania after the elections on 29th of October 2025 is unprecedented. Is unprecedented because Tanzania, or the United Republic of Tanzania, has stood out for the last over 60 years as unique. Unique in the sense that this is a country where ethnicity as a basis for political mobilization is seen to have been eliminated. Unique in the sense that the political parties have remained generally stable. With, if you start from 1964, when Afro Shirazi, led by Abeid Karume, joined TANU, led by Julius Kambarage Nyerere, ultimately becoming Chama cha Mapinduzi in 1977, it has remained generally stable and generally acceptable. And of course, it must be remembered that while the rest of Africa were dilly-dallying about multi-party politics, the Nyerere administration very quickly embraced multi-partyism. And we have seen the change of government very orderly from Nyerere to Mwinyi, from Mwinyi to Mkapa, from Mkapa to Kikwete, from Kikwete to Magufuli, and of course the death of Magufuli, so that President Samia Suluhu Hassan was actually completing a term which was a Magufuli term. And one would have thought that that would continue. In fact, when President Samia Suluhu Hassan took over, there was a very deliberate attempt at rapprochement so that the leading opposition candidates were invited to the State House, and they had this arrangement where everybody thought that the elections would be conducted in a proper manner. Tundu Lissu, who was away in exile, come back home. But no sooner had the dust settled than we started seeing things which were, in the view of some of us, very un-Tanzanian. The kind of intolerance that was not to be associated with the Tanzania. And that is our source of discomfort. Source of discomfort that you are conducting an election where you are leading, in the words of the mainstream media, your leading opposition candidate is charged with the offense of treason in circumstances where many people who are acquainted with the law can say confidently that the charge of treason cannot be proven. Your other candidate is also barred for purely technical reasons, and you go into an election on that basis, then notwithstanding that we would have won, and I hold the view that even if these individuals had been allowed to contest the elections, perhaps they would have had higher votes in urban Tanzania, but rural Tanzania would have neutralized the vote so that Samia Suluhu Hassan would still have won the election. But because of the circumstances in which the victory has now been realized, it is no longer a victory that is untainted. And that is why the bad press, and ordinarily when people conquer fear and they find themselves in the streets, as we saw people demonstrating in Dar es Salaam, in Dodoma, in Mwanza, and in Mbeya, and led to deaths. It redefines politics in a different way. It redefines the nation's trajectory in terms of political orientation in a different way. And that is why you've seen that even those who ordinarily would cast their vote, metaphorically speaking, with the Tanzania, are now saying that the time is now for that new administration to rethink how they are going to operate. Remember that the leading opposition party has already said they do not recognize the result. Of course, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has already been sworn in as the president. My prayer and the hope of many is that it will not be business as usual, that this is the occasion for her administration to climb down from the high pedestal and to say, we made some mistakes. We presided over an environment that led to the death, unnecessary death, of Tanzanians. Let us heal. The only way to heal is to talk about the Tanzania that we want. And I've heard Tanzanians in different parts of the country saying we need to re-examine our constitution. This is the time. We need to have an understanding of a Tanzania that will accommodate different ways. As Nyerere used to say in his early days, demokrasia ni kupambanisha hoja, that democracy is about a competition of ideas so that the electorate has an opportunity of picking from that buffet of ideas. If that administration of the Suluhu administration adopts that approach, then Tanzania will heal. If, on the other hand, what has happened is ignored and swept under the carpet, then the wound will fester and Tanzania will not heal. I hope that will not happen. I would not use the term dictator as defined by the West to describe the actions that she took. I do not know what justified the interruption of social media forum, but I know that in other countries, including Tanzania, which is what happened, that people shut down social media in order to eliminate or reduce the possibility of copycat activities. Because history has demonstrated that sometimes violence is replicated through copycat activities, so that if there are demonstrations in one place, the others say, oh, people are demonstrating and we are not demonstrating. I think that must have been the motivation, well-intentioned. But of course, when things go awry, even the things that are done with the best intentions and the best motives will now be interpreted to mean that you simply don't want to be criticized. And that is what will carry the day, your explanation to the contrary notwithstanding. And there are those who also are saying that the reason why Samia is receiving the flack that she is receiving is because she is a woman. I don't think so. I think she just happens to be a woman, but she is being criticized or being critiqued because she's in a position of leadership. And I'm one of those fellows who believe that once you are in a position of leadership, whether man or woman, you must never wave the flag of gender as a basis for immunizing yourself from scrutiny. Because leadership is gender neutral. So when you get in there, you've got to be prepared for both praise and criticism. The Kenyan-Tanzanian political relationship is one that is defined by different things. But the ideal situation is that we cannot avoid each other. And it's not even ideal. I think it is practical. So those practical realities will always be with us. Remember that we are part of the East African community, talking about integration, talk about the relationship in terms of trade between Kenya and Tanzania. Remember that Tanzania is the headquarters of the East African community. Remember that there are very many Kenyan traders in Tanzania and vice versa. So that relationship will always have its problems, but in the ultimate, I hold the view that we cannot avoid each other, particularly knowing as we do that we have a long history, and the people-to-people relationship is perhaps much stronger and much more important than the political relationship. And that is why perhaps during the events on 29, some Kenyans thought that they owed Tanzanians a duty to go and support them in what they were engaged in. But they should have known that when you want to help a neighbor, it is the neighbor who must define how they want to be helped. You don't imagine that you know what the neighbor wants and what the neighbor needs. And in this regard, there are diplomatic channels to be used. But of course, when you are talking about crowds which are excited and excitable, then people just cross the border, which is not fenced, and they find themselves in such situations. But I believe that we owe Tanzania a duty, even if it is in terms of negotiations or bringing the political combatants together. Kenya can midwife that process, particularly now when Kenya holds the chair. Kenya holds both the chair and the Secretariat of the East African Community. So the duty of Kenya and the role of Kenya is even defined by the current leadership of the East African Community. And I hope that we'll play that role in a positive manner without being arrogant about it. Young people are yearning for something across the continent of Africa, not just in East Africa. Young people are yearning for governments that are responsive to their needs. Young people are yearning about governments that are going to create an environment where they have the ability to move from one country to the other. The young people are anchoring and angling towards governments that are going to provide environment for them to express themselves, whether it's in the area of innovation and invention. And you can see that how musicians, how artists move from one country to the other, how traders move from one country to the other. So when they see governments that still insist on permits, government that still insist on asking questions at the border, they are saying that these governments had better rethink. And if they don't rethink, we are going to think for them. And that is the message that is being sent. And you've seen it not only as regards Uganda and Tanzania, but across the continent of Africa. So the message is loud and clear that we young people are thinking about Africa. And the sooner the political leadership realizes that and embraces that message, the safer it is for the continent of Africa. You know, without mentioning, some of them are known, which, like the Open Society, societies such as Ford Foundation, who are very active in what they call the human rights and democracy space. The reality is that Africans don't need their money. Bills and Melinda Gates Foundation, all these, we don't need their money. They come to Africa and they want to interfere in the affairs of African countries, and they are raising Africans sometimes to fight against Africans. The sooner we get rid of their money, the safer we are. Remember the old saying, he or she who pays the piper calls the tunes. And it annoys me many times when I see a little Western NGO talking at our African governments, disrespecting our African governments. But we are to blame. We are to blame because we create an environment where a Western NGO finance things that ought to be financed by our taxpayers' money. And what do our political leaders do? They are just stealing the money that ought to be used in these areas. So I pray and hope that one day we'll realize that as long as you don't fund your affairs, you'll always be dictated to. So let us create an environment where we in Africa fund the things that we do, and as the saying goes, cut the coat according to the cloth that we have. I look forward to those days. You know, when you want to poison somebody, you sugarcoat the poison. So they eat the poison knowing that they are eating sweets. So the sooner we realize that there is a grander agenda other than the declared agenda, the safer we are. Remember that throughout the ages, the things that people want to capture is the mind. And how do you capture the mind? You don't come announcing yourself that you are going to achieve this. You are nice. Sometimes you even bring water to the villages. You even bring food to the villages and hamlets. You do good things, but your ultimate intention is a grand agenda, that what I call the Trojan horse approach. You let the horse get into the arena, and then it displays its true character in great splendor. So that is what Western NGOs have been doing throughout the ages. Why is it that they go into societies to do the bad, ostensibly to eliminate the bad things, and those things never disappear? It is an industry. There is something that can be called an NGO industry, whose agenda is never to solve any problem, but to make them change their character and shape so they can retain their jobs and their agenda. That is the tragedy. There is some lesson to be drawn that Africa must rethink how we govern ourselves. We must ask ourselves, this constitution that we give ourselves, these systems of governance that we inherited from the colonizer, are they serving us well? We have these political parties which, as experience has shown, continue to divide us along religious lines, along ethnic lines. Is there not a better way of governing ourselves? And one is not saying that we go back to our traditional system, because our societies are not even traditional after Berlin. Can we adopt and adapt and use systems that are going to emphasize the things that unite us rather than the things that disunite us? This is the time. It is the time not only out of the experience in Tanzania, it is the time out of the experience that we have seen even in countries such as Kenya, the experience that we have seen in countries such as Sudan, the experience that we have seen in countries such as Southern Sudan, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in La Côte d'Ivoire, in Senegal. Africa must rethink governance. I personally am thinking about it. I've not found the answer as yet, but there is something that I know, that every time in most African countries after an election, the countries are under the threat of disintegration. So that elections are not things that we look forward to because they expose countries to disintegration. They are things that inject fear in countries. The Ugandans are going into election. They are fearful. Kenyans are going into election in the year 2027. We are fearful. How can it be that that which is meant to help us determine those who are going to serve us only creates fear? My view is that what has happened in Tanzania ought not to have happened. And I've listened to one of the commentators whom I respect, Generali Ulimwengu, who commented in the East Africa, and I agree with him totally, that had the Tanzanian administration led by Samia Suluhu Hassan listened to the comments of some of the people who spoke before the election, this would not have happened. Had he allowed the opposition candidates to contest, had she allowed, rather, the opposition leaders to contest, had she allowed everybody who wanted to contest, this would not have happened. With the help of hindsight, I hope that she too knows that what happened could have been avoided. So our message is very clear. We wish Tanzania well, but we are bold enough and candid enough to tell the Samia Suluhu administration that what happened could have been avoided, and that going forward, despite the fact that she has been declared the winner with over 90% of the vote, it is not for her to rest on her laurels and to say that what happened in Tanzania was a storm in a cup of tea. It wasn't. It is major. It has never happened. It is dangerous and it must be confronted. And how do you confront it? You confront it by engaging those who are in opposition, because they are also Tanzanians, because they have a following, however small you think that following is. That is the message that must be sent to those who think we are too soft on Samia Suluhu Hassan.